He had everything: fame, money, and a Super Bowl ring in reach. But behind the tattoos and touchdowns, something dark was closing in. Why would a multi-millionaire athlete murder a friend in cold blood? Aaron Hernandez was just 23 years old when the New England Patriots offered him a $40 million contract. He was one of the NFL's most explosive tight ends, fast, agile, and magnetic under pressure. Fans loved his grit. Teammates trusted him on the field. Commentators called him the future. Born in Bristol, Connecticut, Hernandez rose from a rough upbringing to collegiate stardom at the University of Florida, where he won a national championship. Though whispers followed him, fights, drugs, bad crowds, his talent seemed to outshine his trouble. He smiled for cameras. He caught game-winning touchdowns. He donated to charity. On paper, he was living the American dream. But off the field, something darker pulsed beneath the surface. Aaron's private world was fraying. Despite the wealth and success, paranoia gripped him. He installed multiple surveillance cameras around his home. He refused to go places without armed backup. He spoke of being watched, followed, betrayed. He was engaged to Shiana Jenkins, his high school sweetheart, and had a young daughter. But trust was thin, and arguments were frequent. Hernandez spent more time with people from his old neighborhood, some with criminal records, others with known gang affiliations. Friends say he was spiraling, drinking more, smoking heavily, snapping without warning. A man who once dazzled stadiums now seemed consumed by suspicion and rage. And then came Odin Lloyd. On June 17, 2013, Odin Lloyd, a semi-pro football player and dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, was found dead in an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. He'd been shot 6 times, execution style. What shocked investigators was the trail Hernandez left behind. Surveillance footage from his own home showed him holding a gun just minutes after Lloyd was murdered. Tire tracks near the body matched a rental car Hernandez had used. Inside, they found shell casings. Texts revealed that Hernandez had picked Lloyd up the night of the murder. Witnesses testified that the two had argued days before. The motive? Still murky, perhaps loyalty, betrayal, or paranoia. But the evidence was mounting. The trial was a media spectacle. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture. A superstar athlete who executed a man he considered a friend, then casually returned home to eat, sleep, and clean up the evidence. The defense argued there was no clear motive. But the jury wasn't swayed. They saw the surveillance, the shell casings, the texts, and they heard from former friends who described Hernandez as volatile and controlling. In April 2015, Aaron Hernandez was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Just 2 years later, in April 2017, he was found dead in his prison cell, officially ruled a suicide. The shockwaves were massive. Patriots fans were stunned. His family was shattered. Odin Lloyd's loved ones wept for a son, brother, and friend they described as gentle, hardworking, and full of potential. Later studies revealed that Hernandez had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a degenerative brain disease linked to head trauma. Some questioned whether this had driven his paranoia and violence. But for Odin Lloyd, the diagnosis changed nothing. He was still gone. And for a young daughter, left fatherless not once, but twice, the cost was permanent. He wore a jersey of glory. He lived behind walls of fear. And in the end, Aaron Hernandez left a legacy no touchdown could erase. But what happens when the killer doesn't spiral slowly, but claims it was all a tragic mistake? Next, we turn to South Africa and the case of Oscar Pistorius. Case 2. Oscar Pistorius, the Blade Runner's fatal shot. He ran on carbon fiber blades, defied science, made history. But one night, he fired 4 bullets through a locked bathroom door. Was it fear or cold-blooded murder? Oscar Pistorius was South Africa's golden boy, a Paralympic champion turned global icon, known as the Blade Runner for his prosthetic racing legs. Born without fibulas, he had both legs amputated before his first birthday. But that never stopped him. He won gold. broke records. And in 2012, he made history by becoming the first double amputee to compete in the Olympics. The world called him inspiring. Magazine covers, endorsements, red carpets. He was everywhere. He spoke of faith, perseverance, and destiny. To many, he was a living miracle. But in private, Oscar's life was becoming increasingly volatile. Beneath the fame, Pistorius battled demons, intense mood swings, outbursts, and a fascination with guns. Friends described him as controlling in relationships and increasingly paranoid. He kept weapons by his bedside. He'd pull a gun in public, even at restaurants. In late 2012, he began dating Reeva Steenkamp, a rising model and law graduate. She was smart, compassionate, and passionate about women's rights. But their romance was rocky. Arguments were frequent. Reeva confided in friends about Oscar's temper. She texted him, "I'm scared of you sometimes." But no one imagined how far things would go. In the early hours of February 14, 2013, Valentine's Day, Reeva was shot dead in Pistorius' home. 4 bullets fired through a locked bathroom door. She was found slumped over, bleeding, a phone nearby. She'd been hiding or trying to escape. Oscar told police he thought she was an intruder, that he panicked, that it was a mistake. But prosecutors questioned everything. Why didn't he check if Reeva was in bed? Why shoot 4 times without warning? Why through a closed door? Neighbors reported hearing a woman's screams before the gunfire. The narrative of fear was crumbling. The trial captivated the world. Live coverage, breaking headlines, a courtroom turned theater. Oscar wept on the stand, vomited at graphic evidence, and claimed deep remorse. But prosecutors argued it wasn't fear, it was rage. That a couple's argument turned deadly, that Reeva tried to flee and he killed her in anger. Ballistics showed the shots were aimed, not random. Text messages revealed emotional abuse, and forensics contradicted his timeline. In 2014, he was found guilty of culpable homicide, a lesser charge. But after appeals and global outrage in 2017, his conviction was upgraded to murder. He was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months. Oscar Pistorius is still serving time in South Africa's Atteridgeville prison. His legacy shattered, his medals gathered dust, and Reeva Steenkamp, only 29 when she died, became a symbol of domestic violence in a country plagued by it. Her parents speak often, not with vengeance, but with grief. They say her laugh filled rooms, that she wanted to help abused women, that she died at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. Oscar once inspired millions, but his fall wasn't just personal. It shook a nation. She dreamed of justice. She believed in love, but Reeva Steenkamp died behind a locked door, afraid, unheard, and alone. But what if the killer didn't run or make excuses? What if he pulled the trigger and then ended his own life? Next, we go to Kansas City and the devastating story of Jovan Belcher. Case 3. Jovan Belcher, the linebacker who snapped. He walked into the stadium, thanked his coach, then pulled out a gun and ended everything. What pushed an NFL linebacker from game day to murder-suicide in under an hour? Jovan Belcher was the kind of athlete sports fans root for. An undrafted free agent from the University of Maine, he defied the odds and earned a starting spot with the Kansas City Chiefs. Intelligent, disciplined, soft-spoken, he seemed grounded. Belcher wasn't flashy. He didn't chase headlines. Teammates described him as reliable and respectful. He studied sociology in college. He worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and proudly became a father in 2012. From the outside, Jovan Belcher was living the dream. A solid career, a beautiful girlfriend, a new baby, and a future full of promise. But something inside him was coming undone. The cracks had been forming for months. Belcher and his girlfriend, 22-year-old Kasandra Perkins, were struggling. Arguments over parenting, trust, and Belcher's late nights had become regular. Friends and family sensed growing tension, but nothing explosive, until it was too late. Belcher had a history of head injuries, and reports would later raise concerns about undiagnosed concussions, or CTE. He'd started drinking heavily, missing team meetings, and sleeping in his car. His mental state was unraveling. Those closest to him described a man caught in a private storm, torn between love and resentment, stress and silence, pressure and pride. On the morning of December 1st, 2012, an argument between Jovan and Kasandra erupted in their Kansas City home. At around 7:50 a.m., neighbors heard gunshots. Belcher had shot Kasandra multiple times in front of his mother, who was visiting at the time. Then he kissed his baby daughter, apologized to his mom, and fled. He drove to Arrowhead Stadium, where the Kansas City Chiefs practiced and played. In the parking lot, he spoke calmly to his coach and general manager. He said thank you. He said he'd done something terrible, and then he turned the gun on himself. There was no trial, no courtroom, no cross-examination. The legal system would never question Jovan Belcher. But the questions he left behind were unbearable. Why didn't anyone see this coming? Could it have been prevented? Was it a crime of rage or a brain destroyed by football? An autopsy revealed Belcher had alcohol, painkillers, and signs of brain trauma. Later studies of his brain confirmed chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, at just 25 years old. Kasandra's family mourned a daughter full of life, who had dreams of finishing college and raising her baby girl. The NFL faced tough questions about player health and domestic violence. The murder-suicide devastated both families and the team. The Chiefs played their scheduled game the next day, just 24 hours after Belcher's death. Some players were still in shock, others were numb. Kasandra's parents raised the child she left behind. The NFL eventually launched new concussion protocols, but critics argue it came too late for Belcher and for others like him. In public memory, he's both a killer and a casualty of the sport he loved. He wore a helmet to protect his mind, but no one saw the damage beneath. And in one morning, love, life, and legacy vanished in silence and gunfire. What happens when a crime isn't committed in a moment of rage, but with cold calculation and horrifying cruelty? Next, we travel to Brazil, where a football star made his ex-girlfriend disappear and fed her to dogs. Up next, Bruno Fernandes de Souza. Case 4. Bruno Fernandes de Souza, the goalkeeper of horror. He was the rising star of Brazilian football, a goalkeeper destined for the national team, until his ex-girlfriend vanished, without a trace. In the late 2000s, Bruno Fernandes de Souza was making headlines for all the right reasons. As the captain and goalkeeper of Flamengo, one of Brazil's most popular football clubs, Bruno was beloved by fans and praised by analysts. He was charismatic, skilled, and confident. With a bright smile and commanding presence, he seemed to own every match he played. Commentators saw him as the future of Brazilian goalkeeping. Some even said he could be next in line for the national team. To the public, Bruno was football royalty, rich, famous, and adored. But behind closed doors, he was playing a much darker game. Bruno had a secret he didn't want the public to know. In 2009, he had an affair with a young model named Eliza Samudio. When she became pregnant, Bruno allegedly demanded she terminate the pregnancy. She refused. That child, Bruninho, was born later that year. Eliza took legal action, seeking child support. She also claimed Bruno and his associates had threatened her. Their relationship grew increasingly hostile. Eliza was outspoken. Bruno was determined to avoid scandal. What followed wasn't just a custody battle. It was a campaign of silence, shame, and revenge, and it ended in unspeakable horror. On June 4, 2010, Eliza Samudio disappeared. She was last seen getting into a car reportedly linked to Bruno's associates. She never came home. The investigation revealed chilling details. Bruno's friend and former police officer, Luiz Santos, had kidnapped Eliza. She was taken to a remote house in Minas Gerais, tortured, strangled, and dismembered. Reports claim her remains were fed to dogs. All this allegedly orchestrated by Bruno to eliminate a problem. Eliza's baby was left at the home of Bruno's wife, alone, abandoned, and traumatized. Bruno denied everything. But the silence around Eliza's disappearance was beginning to break. The trial drew massive media attention. Brazil was shocked. A national sports hero now stood accused of brutal, calculated murder. Witnesses testified about Bruno's role. One of his cousins described the killing in detail. Phone records, bank transfers, and timelines linked Bruno to the planning. The prosecution argued this was not a moment of rage, but premeditated execution. In 2013, Bruno was convicted of kidnapping, murder, and hiding a body. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Eliza's mother wept in court. She said her daughter died because she wanted her son to have a father. For years, Bruno sat behind bars, but in 2017, controversy erupted when he was temporarily released on appeal. Shockingly, he returned to playing professional football for a small Brazilian club. The public backlash was intense. Eventually, Brazil's Supreme Court revoked his freedom. He was returned to prison, where he remains today. Eliza Samudio's son, Bruninho, now lives with her mother. He has no memory of his mother, only stories and scars. He's been told who his father is, but not everything he's done. A generation of fans once cheered for Bruno. Now they try to forget his name. She wanted child support. He gave her a death sentence, and the boy she died protecting will carry the silence forever. From Brazil to the wrestling ring, our next story takes us to a man loved by millions, who turned his home into a crime scene. Case 5. Chris Benoit, the wrestler who killed his family. He was a wrestling icon, a world champion with fans across continents. But over one weekend, he murdered his wife, his child, and then himself. Chris Benoit was considered one of the greatest technical wrestlers of his time. Known as the Rabid Wolverine, he built a 22-year career in professional wrestling that included stints with WCW, ECW, and most famously, WWE. Fans admired his relentless drive, unmatched discipline, and devotion to craft. He wasn't the flashiest, but he was respected by fans, peers, and industry veterans. Benoit was a father, a husband, and a man who seemed to live by honor and control. In 2004, he won the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 20. It was a career-defining moment, celebrated by millions. But the man who smiled with the belt that night was already breaking inside. Behind the accolades, Benoit's personal life was deeply troubled. His wife, Nancy, was a former wrestling manager who went by Woman in the Ring. Their relationship was volatile, marked by accusations of abuse and emotional instability. Friends noted that Chris had become increasingly withdrawn. He was grieving the death of close friend Eddie Guerrero, who died suddenly in 2005. Those close to him said he never truly recovered. He was battling chronic pain, anxiety, and severe depression. He used steroids and painkillers. His mood swings became violent. His sense of control, the thing he prided himself on, was slipping, and no one knew how far it would go. On June 22, 2007, Chris Benoit murdered his wife Nancy in their Georgia home, strangling her and placing a Bible next to her body. The next day, he killed his 7-year-old son, Daniel, in his bedroom. He sedated the boy, then ended his life the same way. He left another Bible by his side. On the third day, Benoit hanged himself in his home gym. 3 days, 3 lives. And no warning that made any sense. The wrestling world was stunned. Fans were heartbroken. And yet, the darkness had only begun to unfold. There was no trial, but the investigation unearthed a harrowing truth. Toxicology reports found steroids and painkillers in Benoit's system, but what shocked researchers most was the condition of his brain. Tests revealed extensive CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, more severe than any seen in a living football player at the time. His brain, doctors said, resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The years of head trauma, diving headbutts, and concussions had taken a devastating toll. WWE distanced itself quickly. Tributes were pulled. Mentions of Benoit vanished. For the wrestling community, it was a moral earthquake. Nancy's family mourned the loss of a daughter and a grandson. Friends struggled with the duality, how a man they loved had become a killer. Wrestling fans were left with a name they no longer knew how to say. Chris Benoit was erased from WWE history, but his crime forced a reckoning in the industry. Changes to wellness policies, banning of dangerous moves, and growing awareness about brain trauma. Daniel Benoit never got to grow up. never got to wrestle as he once dreamed. He became the silent victim in a tragedy no scripted storyline could ever prepare for. He lived by discipline. He died in chaos. And for the child who adored him, there will never be a curtain call. But not every killer leaves a note or a reason. Some explode in rage in the middle of traffic without warning. Next, the road rage murder committed by boxing champion Esteban De Jesus. Case 6. Esteban De Jesus, the champion who lost control. He once stood toe-to-toe with legends in the ring. But one day, in traffic, a simple argument turned into deadly violence. Why would a boxing hero pull the trigger over nothing? Esteban De Jesus was a Puerto Rican lightweight boxing star in the 1970s, a fighter who once handed Roberto Duran his first professional defeat. Fast, sharp, and strategic, De Jesus had a reputation for clean technique and unshakable focus. He became the WBC lightweight champion in 1976. He was admired in Puerto Rico, hailed as a sports icon, and welcomed in homes as a national symbol of pride. Young boxers looked up to him. Promoters praised his discipline and humility. He was living the dream, until that dream began to unravel behind the scenes. Outside the ring, De Jesus struggled with a growing addiction to heroin and cocaine. His success had come fast, but so did the pressure. The fame, the money, the nightlife all took their toll. He fought fierce battles, not just with opponents, but with himself. Addiction blurred the lines of reality. His behavior grew erratic, relationships strained, those closest to him worried, but Esteban had always been good at hiding pain, especially from himself. He still trained, still smiled for cameras, but the sharp fighter was slipping, and one impulsive moment would erase everything he'd built. On November 27, 1980, Esteban De Jesus was driving through Puerto Rico when he got into a dispute with another driver, a 17-year-old named Roberto Cintron Gonzalez. The reason? A minor traffic incident, an accidental cutoff. But what followed wasn't minor at all. Enraged, De Jesus pulled a handgun and shot the teenager in cold blood. Cintron died from his injuries. A family lost their son, and a nation watched in disbelief as one of its heroes became a murderer in a single, senseless moment. Esteban De Jesus was arrested on the spot. In 1981, De Jesus was tried and convicted of first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses, motive, confession. The court sentenced him to life in prison. Fans were stunned. The boxing community was silent. The same man who once made headlines for beating champions now became a symbol of wasted talent and destructive impulse. But behind bars, something changed. Esteban began to confront the addiction that had controlled him. He found faith. He began speaking to inmates, mentoring youth, and expressing remorse for the life he took. In prison, he stopped fighting the world and started fighting for redemption. In the late 1980s, Esteban was diagnosed with HIV, likely contracted through shared needles during his drug use years before. The disease progressed into AIDS. His health declined rapidly. In a rare act of compassion, Puerto Rican authorities granted him early release in 1988. He returned to his brother's home, where he died months later, at the age of 37. Before his death, Esteban met with the family of Roberto Cintron. He apologized, tearfully and sincerely. The family, showing remarkable grace, forgave him. He died no longer a champion, but a man who finally understood the cost of his rage. Sometimes the past doesn't snap, it festers. Up next, a 1980s skateboarding legend whose dark obsession led to rape and murder. This is the chilling story of Mark Gator Rogowski. Case 7. Mark Rogowski, the skater who couldn't let go. He was rich, famous, the face of a sport exploding in popularity. But when his world slipped out from under him, he didn't fall. He destroyed. Why did Mark Gator Rogowski turn from a skateboard icon into a killer? In the 1980s, Mark Rogowski, better known as Gator, was one of skateboarding's biggest stars. With wild energy, signature tricks, and a flashy personality, he became a fixture in magazines, commercials, and competitions. Kids wore his gear, sponsors fought for him. His video parts were legendary, He toured the world with Bones Brigade and had a lucrative endorsement deal with Vision Streetwear. To fans, Gator was skateboarding, fun, rebellious, free. But behind the fame, the man who flew high off ramps was starting to spiral. As street skating rose and vert skating declined, Gator's career stalled. Sponsors backed off, public attention faded, the spotlight he once lived in grew cold. Around the same time, his relationship with longtime girlfriend Brandi McLean ended. He didn't handle it well. He grew obsessive, angry, unhinged. Friends noticed troubling changes. He became increasingly erratic, started drinking heavily, and reportedly became involved in extreme religious groups. He couldn't let go of the fame, or the past, or Brandi. But instead of confronting his loss, he redirected it towards someone who had nothing to do with it. In March 1991, Mark invited Jessica Bergsten, a 22-year-old friend of Brandi's, to hang out. She was visiting from out of town. She trusted him. What happened next was horrifying. After spending the day together, Gator brought her back to his apartment. There, he attacked her, raped her, then beat her with a metal club and suffocated her with a surfboard bag. He buried her body in a remote desert location. Jessica's family reported her missing. For weeks, there were no answer. But guilt eventually surfaced. A few weeks later, Gator walked into a church and confessed to a counselor. Then he turned himself in. Mark Rogowski was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence, bolstered by his own confession, was damning. He later claimed mental instability, citing religious visions and emotional breakdowns. But the prosecution presented a more grounded motive: rage, jealousy, and loss of control. He saw Jessica as a surrogate for Brandi. Killing her was his twisted form of revenge. In 1992, Gator pled guilty to rape and murder, avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 31 years to life. The skate world was stunned. Jessica's family devastated. A sport built on freedom and rebellion now had a dark stain it couldn't wipe clean. Mark Gator Rogowski remains in prison. He's been denied parole multiple times, most recently in the 2020s. Each time, the board cites a lack of full remorse and a continued risk to society. Jessica Bergsten never got to grow old, never got to live the life she was just beginning. Her parents speak of her warmth, her laughter, her dreams. None of them had anything to do with Gator's downfall. And yet, she paid the price. Skateboarding eventually moved on, but it never forgot. He lost the fame. He couldn't handle the fall, and in his rage, he took a life that had nothing to do with his own. But what if the murder wasn't random or impulsive, but planned with deadly intent? Next, a rising NFL player who put a hit on his pregnant girlfriend. This is the story of Rae Carruth. Case 8. Rae Carruth, the wide receiver who planned a hit. He was fast, talented, and headed for NFL stardom. But instead of running routes, he ran from responsibility. Why would Rae Carruth order a hit on the mother of his unborn child? Rae Carruth was a first-round NFL draft pick in 1997, selected 27th overall by the Carolina Panthers. At the University of Colorado, he'd earned All-American honors and was known for his lightning speed and reliable hands. In Charlotte, fans had high hopes. He was young, promising, and poised to become a star wide receiver. Coaches praised his performance. Reporters admired his quiet focus. On the field, he was all business. Off the field, he lived a life of status and charm, nice cars, celebrity parties, and multiple romantic relationships. But behind the polished image, Carruth was hiding something deeper and darker. In 1999, Carruth was involved with 24-year-old Cherica Adams, a real estate agent and former model. Their relationship was casual, but when Cherica became pregnant, she made the decision to keep the child. Rae didn't take it well. According to friends and court testimony, he felt trapped. His football career had stalled due to injuries, and now he was facing unexpected fatherhood. He wanted out, but not just from the relationship, from the responsibility entirely. Cherica refused to have an abortion. She wanted to raise the child. Rae, meanwhile, began planning something far more sinister. On the night of November 16, 1999, Cherica and Rae went to see a movie. Afterward, they drove in separate cars. As she followed Rae through a quiet suburban neighborhood, another car pulled up beside her. Gunfire erupted. 4 bullets hit Cherica through the driver's side window. She was critically injured, but somehow she managed to call 911. In the call, she told police, "Rae Carruth blocked me in, and somebody came and shot me." Her worst source. These triggered a manhunt and would later be used as key evidence. Cherica was rushed to the hospital. Doctors delivered her baby, a boy named Chancellor, but she wouldn't survive. She died 4 weeks later from her injuries. Rae Carruth fled. He went on the run, triggering a nationwide search. Days later, he was found hiding in the trunk of a car in Tennessee, along with $3,900 in cash, water, snacks, and a cell phone. Prosecutors charged him with conspiracy to commit murder, using the testimony of the shooter, Van Brett Watkins, who claimed Rae promised him money to get rid of Cherica. The case shocked the country, an NFL player accused of orchestrating a hit on his pregnant girlfriend. In 2001, Rae Carruth was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. He was sentenced to 18 to 24 years in prison. He was acquitted of first-degree murder, but not of guilt in the public eye. Chancellor Lee Adams survived. He was born with cerebral palsy and permanent brain damage caused by lack of oxygen after the shooting. He was raised by his grandmother, Sandra, who became a powerful advocate for children with disabilities and victims of domestic violence. Cherica's memory lives on through her son. In interviews, Sandra says she forgave Rae, but never forgot. Chancellor, now a young man, inspires thousands with his resilience and spirit. Rae Carruth was released from prison in 2018. He's tried to avoid the public eye, but the shadow of his actions follows him wherever he goes. Some murderers act on impulse, others, like Carruth, plan it out. But the next man, he killed over jealousy and thought he could walk away. Case 9. Eric Naposki, the linebacker who killed for love and money. He had played in the NFL, owned a nightclub, dated a millionaire's girlfriend. Then one night, her boyfriend was shot dead in his kitchen. Was it a robbery or the perfect setup? Eric Naposki wasn't a household NFL name, but he lived like one. A former linebacker who played briefly for the New England Patriots and Indianapolis Colts. He carved out a short but flashy career in pro football before retiring in the early 90s. After the NFL, he moved to Southern California, where he reinvented himself as a bouncer and nightclub figure. Tall, muscular, and confident, Naposki made an impression, especially on women. That's how he met Nanette Johnston Packard, a beautiful, smart, and ambitious woman who had just started dating a wealthy entrepreneur. But Eric didn't know he was stepping into a triangle, one built on deception and greed. By 1994, Nanette was living with 55-year-old multimillionaire Bill McLaughlin in Newport Beach. He had recently sold his medical business and was generous with gifts, vacations, and financial support. But Nanette had a secret. She was seeing Eric Naposki on the side. The two carried on a hidden relationship, exchanging steamy letters, meeting in private, and, eventually, plotting a future without Bill. Nanette had convinced Bill to name her the beneficiary of a $1 million life insurance policy. She also had access to his bank accounts. Behind closed doors, she and Naposki whispered of a new life together. But first, Bill had to be gone. On the evening of December 15, 1994, Bill McLaughlin returned home after a day at work. As he walked into his kitchen and opened the refrigerator, someone stepped out of the shadows and shot him 6 times. The crime scene showed no signs of forced entry. Police believed it was someone who knew him, someone close. Suspicion fell on Nanette quickly, but there was little hard evidence. She claimed innocence. Eric was questioned, but without physical evidence, the case went cold. For nearly 15 years, it stayed that way. The killers had disappeared into the California sun. In 2009, new investigators took another look. Cell phone records, bank transactions, and witness accounts from the 90s were reanalyzed. What they found reopened the case. Eric's alibi didn't hold up. He claimed he was at football practice, but there was no record. Neighbors remembered his car near the McLaughlin home, and a former friend revealed that Eric once confessed, saying he took care of the problem. In 2011, Eric Naposki was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Nanette was arrested shortly after. At trial, prosecutors argued that the murder was about money and manipulation. Nanette had promised Eric a life together. Once Bill was out of the way, Eric denied everything, but the jury didn't believe him. In 2012, he was convicted of first-degree murder. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nanette was convicted in a separate trial and received the same sentence. Bill McLaughlin's family finally had justice, but not peace. His children spoke in court of the deep loss, of the holidays he missed, the grandchildren he never met. They said Nanette stole more than money. She stole trust. Eric Naposki remains behind bars in California. He continues to claim innocence, appealing his conviction, but the evidence and the silence of time are stacked against him. He once dreamed of NFL glory. Instead, he'll spend his life in a cell, remembered not for tackles, but for betrayal. He chased power. She chased money, and together they killed the man who gave them both. Our final case takes us to Australia, and to a woman who carried a deadly secret for years. A water polo player, a hidden pregnancy, and a baby who vanished without a trace. This is the haunting story of Keli Lane. Case 10. Keli Lane, the water polo star and the vanished baby. She was a rising athlete, a private school graduate, a future Olympian. But for 15 years, no one knew what happened to her newborn daughter. Did Keli Lane give her baby away or make her disappear? Keli Lane was a golden girl. She grew up in the elite suburbs of Sydney, Australia, privately educated, graceful, and fiercely competitive. As a teen, she became one of the top water polo players in the country. She trained for the Olympics. She coached younger athletes. She was a known face in sporting circles, even appearing in media profiles about Australia's athletic future. Teachers called her dedicated. Friends called her charming. Keli's life seemed picture-perfect. But that perfect image would soon fracture under the weight of a chilling secret. Beneath her public success, Keli Lane was hiding an astonishing double life. Between 1995 and 1999, she became pregnant 5 times and managed to keep it secret from nearly everyone around her, including friends, family, and teammates. 2 pregnancies ended in abortions. 2 children were adopted out, all without public knowledge. But it was the 5th child, a baby girl named Tegan, born on September 12, 1996, that sparked a national mystery. Keli left the hospital with Tegan, but no one ever saw the child again. She returned to a friend's wedding just hours later, smiling, composed, pretending nothing had happened. For years, there were no questions, no missing persons report, no body, no witness. Then, in 1999, a routine check by Child Protection Services raised red flags. Lane had claimed to have given birth, but there was no record of the baby's existence after the hospital. When questioned, Keli gave conflicting stories. She claimed Tegan had been given to the child's father, whom she named as Andrew Morris or Andrew Norris, but police could find no such purse. No adoption, no evidence of a transfer, just silence. Investigators feared the worst, that Keli Lane had murdered her own baby to preserve her image, career, and reputation. The case went to trial in 2010, 14 years after Tegan's birth. Prosecutors presented a timeline built on lies, inconsistencies, and a trail of secrecy. They argued Keli viewed the pregnancy as a threat to her career and social status. She wanted it gone, and in the absence of any legitimate explanation, she had, they said, eliminated her child. There was no body, no DNA, no eyewitness. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted Keli Lane of murder, sentencing her to 18 years in prison with a non-parole period of 13 years. The verdict split public opinion. Some saw her as a cold killer, others as a victim of stigma and pressure. Keli Lane remains in prison in New South Wales. She maintains her innocence and claims Tegan is alive, somewhere, with a father the system failed to find. But no credible evidence has ever supported that claim. Tegan's body has never been found. Her fate remains one of Australia's most haunting mysteries. The case led to national conversations about reproductive stigma, secrecy, and the psychological toll of living 2 lives. But for Tegan, if she is gone, There is no explanation that makes it right. She hid 5 pregnancies. She lived 2 lives. And somewhere, a child disappeared, without a name, a grave, or a goodbye. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and which case stayed with you the most. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.